And members, we just have quorum, so if anyone has to step out, if you could let us know. I'll try to get through things in an efficient manner.
I believe we are good to go. Yes, we're now live.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the November 9th Full Authority Board meeting. This meeting is going to be held electronically as well as in person. And the recording and draft minutes will be posted to the Kettle Creek's website on November 9th. The meeting will be streamed live on our Facebook page. So at this time, maybe I could ask the chair to do a call of who's here.
Dennis Kravitz,
Here.
Jagger,
Present.
Stephen Harvey,
Here.
Jim Herbert,
Here.
Grant Jones sent regrets. Bill Mackey sent regrets. Steve Peters,
Here.
Elizabeth Caloza. Allison Warwick,
Here.
Ralph Winfield. So Chair, we have 6 of 10 members present, meeting quorum, and Ralph is just joining.
Great. All right, now we know who's here. Are there any declaration of pecuniary interest? Hearing and seeing none, we have nothing for the hearing board. We do have the minutes in front of us from October 19th. So if you've had time to look at those minutes, can I have a motion to approve?
Kravitz.
Okay, Dennis made the motion, seconded by.
Herbert.
Thank you,
Harvey.
Jim.
Herbert.
Great. Any comments, questions? If not, I'm going to ask Elizabeth to call the vote, please.
Kravitz,
Yes.
Jagger,
Yes.
Harvey,
Yes.
Herbert,
Yes.
Peters,
Yes.
Winfield,
Yes.
Warwick,
Yeah.
and that motion passes.
All right. So now moving on to there's no matters arising.
Actually, Chair, if I can just make a note, I just wanted to update members that Allison was feted this past Saturday as the outgoing warden of Middlesex Center. We're just really appreciative of her leadership over the past year, as well as her naming Kettle Creek Conservation Authority to the Middlesex County's honor roll, which was a real privilege. And I just want to thank her again for her leadership. And I know we've all appreciated her time on the board. And certainly her contributions to the regions make this a better community in which to live now and in the future. So thank you.
Thank you. Dominique, I see your hand up. Oh,
They're clapping.
other clapping, okay. Thank you. It's been great working with everybody, and I'll be sad to not be able to be on the board again, but I know that you'll continue on and do well. So all the best to everyone in the future. Matters arising done, and then correspondence.
No
No correspondence. All right, so now we're moving into new business, and Elizabeth, I see you've got.
Yeah, I'm here. Joe and I are going to tag team this report on the Build More Homes Faster Act. And we did send out an advanced package that kind of gave you a very high level look at the proposed legislation, but we wanted to give a more wholesome presentation with as much and share with you as much information as staff have been able to gather so far. And just to give some background on it as well. So where I wanted to start this morning was just where we are at with the CA Act review. As members recall, we've been dealing with this for some time now, really beginning in 2018, 2019.
They can't see me. They can't see me.
In 2018 and 2019. So we're working basically towards a new budget and apportionment in 2024. Sorry, I'm just gonna try to
That's better.
We're working towards a new budget process and MOUs that need to be in place by January 2024. And if you all recall, we had to develop a transition plan to work towards this, which included categorizing our programs and services into those category 1, 2, and 3 buckets. That was done in December of last year, circulating that draft programs and services out to our member municipalities and developing an inventory of those programs and services to share with municipalities. And all that work has been meant to inform these new draft agreements and MOUs that were basically, we were entering a period, and now where staff are going to be going out and especially as the new councils come on, re-educating those new councils and starting to begin to draft those MOUs and agreements that would bring us into compliance with the CA Act changes that are already in place. That has significantly changed with the More Homes Built Faster Act. So it was introduced basically the day after the election. And so it was introduced on October 25th. And it's part of the province's commitment to get 1.5 million homes built within the next 10 years. The province is seeking feedback basically on about 20 regulatory and legislative and policy postings, which have all been posted on the Environmental Registry of Ontario. That's a significant amount of paperwork to get through and to really understand how the changes in one piece of legislation is going to affect the other legislation. They're all kind of interwoven together. So since October 25th, staff have been participating in various webinars and working groups and meeting with other neighboring CAs to get a better understanding, but we're still not there yet. We're still trying to fit all these pieces together. So that's part of the discussion that I wanted to have today, and just to share information with you, because all of these postings not only really have to do with CAs, but they also have a big impact to member municipalities as well. AMO has begun to post some advocacy work and as well as understanding of the postings as well. So I encourage you to continue to watch their files as well. And the Ontario Big Cities mayors came out early after the announcement of this legislation and really advocated for, they want to get this right. They believe that all 3 levels of government should be working together to advocate for housing and work with the province to get this. But they did call for an extension to the review of these pieces of legislation, maybe because they're recognizing that this is coming in a very transitional period within the province, especially for the member municipalities, as many of you are welcoming new council members, significant changes on some councils. And this is a lot of information for those new councillors to take in, let alone seasoned councillors that have been sitting on boards and dealing with this for some time. So a lot to take in, but what I wanted to focus in on today is really the acts and the regulations that legislation and regulation that really pertain to the CAs. And there's basically 4 of them. They're up on the screen there with their corresponding ERR posting. The links were forwarded out to you in prior communication. The closing dates, again, there's a fairly fast turnaround for the amount of information that needs to be digested here, with a lot of the postings ending November 24th and some out to December 30th. So what I thought I'd start is just kind of trying to outline what the provincial, there's not a lot that we do know, but what we do know is what the province's objectives are trying to hit with this act. And basically they're saying they're trying to reduce the processes that they believe are delaying construction and pushing home prices up. They want to build up near transit and form zoning to create more gentle density and protect home buyers by utilizing provincial lands to build more attainable homes. So really, again, trying to meet that goal of 1.5 million houses. The provincial focus on CAs, there's some things that we've heard in the past, accountability, transparency. They want our CAs mainly to focus on our mandate of protecting life and property from natural hazards and flooding, support faster and less costly approvals, streamline the CA processes, and to a certain extent help make land suitable for development available, while reducing potential risks from natural hazards, including flooding. They do anticipate, at least what it says in the posting, the province believes that all of these changes will have no real environmental consequence of these proposals. They believe that they will all be neutral, and they don't believe that they don't expect that there will be any financial costs to the CAs or member municipalities as a result of these changes, except for some minor administrative costs, but are willing to hear comments back on both of those items. So just to recap our planning processes locally, since 2018, CAs have been really listening to the government's concerns, and I think making large changes and strides in terms of listening to their concerns, certainly about accountability and transparency, really, and especially related to our planning and review departments. So currently, we only provide plan input and review with respect to natural hazards mandate and provide guidance on impacts of land use changes from a watershed scale. Some things that we've introduced within the last year or have already had for a substantial amount of time, we have those plan review and regulation approval policy guidelines. They're available to the public online. We've introduced our fee schedule based on cost recovery. We have our online screening map that's going to be available by year end. And we report yearly on our timelines. And for instance, we have on the screen what we accomplished in 2021. We issued 84 permits, and those were all issued within 21 days, which meets or exceeds the provincial guidelines. So in terms of here locally, the CA stalling planning processes or the ability to build or develop this area isn't there. I also want to highlight before we get into the details of the postings is the work that the CA working group has accomplished since it was established in 2020. And it was then our MP, Jeff Yurks, that spearheaded this and implemented it. And it was really, it's a group of stakeholders, including the CA, there's representatives on it from AMO, Conservation Ontario, as well as the development and agricultural sector. And they've been really working over the past couple of years to ensure all those initial round of CA Act changes are implemented in a fair and balanced manner that makes sense. And so their input to the province as we try to roll out these changes, I believe, has really been invaluable and has been really made it easier for both the CAs to understand where the province is coming from and work with them to make sure that the changes make sense for everyone in a balanced manner. And so you'll see my comments throughout this morning's meeting as really advocating that CA working group should stay in place and continue its work as we look at these next rounds of proposed changes from the province. So just to get into the specifics of those ERR postings that relate specifically to the CAs, and what I've done this morning is kind of broken them out into different categories. The first category I want to concentrate on are changes that we believe, again, on these first initial reads of the proposed legislation that might undermine CA's ability to protect property and life from natural hazards. And you remember from the province, they want to build homes, but protect people from natural hazards and erosion. And I think in the effort to do one, you might be detrimenting the other or moving too fast. So one of the proposed changes was an enabling piece of legislation, which would allow the minister to name certain municipalities where a permit under the CA Act would not be required. And that would be set out in a regulation, and those permits would be subject to certain conditions that would be set out in a regulation. So we don't have that regulation yet. It's an enabling piece of legislation that if the minister chose to name those certain municipalities, they could do so, and then in doing so, they would name as well the conditions that would be set out in that regulation. The fear here is that in doing so, you would lose a certain amount of consistency province-wide. This would be valid in certain municipalities and not in other. It's not a real clear sense of what the conditions on those permits would be and how much say the CAs would have in determining what those would be. So again, just there's a lack of information there. Would this be province-wide? What criteria would be used to determine the exceptions? And a possible lack of consistency and local watershed knowledge being put into those exceptions if they were so named by the minister. So that's a concerning piece. The next one is, as we've been moving through the current changes in the CAA Act, you recall that we were asked to bucket our programs and services into category 1, category 2, and category 3. Category 1 was our mandatory programs and services, our flood forecasting, our planning. Category 2 were programs and services that municipality was asking a CA to perform on their behalf. And we could continue to do that as long as MOU, or agreement, was set up between that willing municipality and that willing CA to enter into that agreement. What this proposes is that it would limit CA's comments moving forward only to natural hazards. And the CA would no longer be able to enter MOUs to provide comments on behalf of municipalities for those prescribed acts that are listed there. So it basically takes away that ability for CAs to enter into category 2 agreements for anything not related to natural hazards with member municipalities. So a good example here is lots of CAs out there are already in MOUs or agreements with their member municipalities to comment on natural heritage. So they offer up natural heritage review. The processes are already in place, that municipalities are expecting that service being provided by the CAs, and they've already been working towards either where MOUs don't exist, creating MOUs or refining MOUs to meet what the CA Act has recently outlined. This would change all this. And in large parts of the province, there would be certainly a lot of cost efficiency loss if some of these CAs weren't allowed to offer these services to their member municipalities, or downsizing those costs back to the member municipalities when the CAs and municipalities have a system that is relatively working. And in a situation where the member municipalities are asking or wanting that service and working relationship with the CAs, it's working on the local level. So again, a lot of questions around why that is concerning for the province at this point, possibly a lack of understanding of the symbiotic relationship that does exist there between the member municipalities and their CAs, and definitely a fear if this was to go forward that there would be a loss of that watershed perspective that we know that the CAs are able to provide. The other one is that the CAs require CAs to issue permits for projects subject to a community infrastructure and housing accelerator that requests a municipality under section 31 of the Planning Act to allow the minister to review and amend any conditions to those permits. So the minister can limit conditions the CA includes on permits subject to those community infrastructure housing accelerators. So again, in those areas where they really want to build homes fast, that the minister would be able to step in and force a permit to be issued and may remove any conditions to a permit that a CA may have imposed traditionally. So again, concerning about really the ability of the CA to protect life and property from natural hazards and make sure that in an effort to build homes, we're not losing perspective of how flooding and natural hazards can be playable. Wetlands, this has come up in the Ontario Wetland Evaluation Systems Manual, and it's up for some changes. Two important changes within that manual that I think members should be aware of is that they're proposing that wetlands can no longer consider how species at risk use wetlands when you're evaluating them. And when we're evaluating wetlands, we must consider them in isolation, and not as a complex. So when we look at wetlands, a number of them are, especially in our watershed, are smaller wetlands, but they're working in concert with a number of other smaller wetlands as a complex to really offer a large amount of flood capacity, as well as hydraulic capacity as well. So mitigating flooding, mitigating climate change. So, storing that water in a flood and storing it when in drought conditions as well. The staff have done some preliminary analysis of how this would affect our local CA. Wetland complexes, again, are interconnected. They have staff, many of our wetlands in our watershed have a protected status only as a complex, but wouldn't qualify for protection on their own. And when staff looked at how many of our wetlands that are on our landscape that are actually working as complexes, 70% of our wetland features are actually complexes. And so would need to be evaluated as part of those complexes to be saved or protected. And if they were separated and analyzed on their own, they wouldn't probably qualify for that protection. This is really important for our watershed because Environment Canada recommends about 10% wetland cover in the watershed to support wildlife species. Our 2018 watershed report card shows that we have only about 1.34% of the entire watershed is wetland habitat. And when you look or consider that 70% of that is wetland complexes, it really underlies the importance of the fact that we need to protect those complexes in order to protect the natural wetland that we have left on our landscape. The manual does speak to offsetting measures that, where a wetland was removed from the landscape, it would be rebuilt somewhere else. But especially in a landscape like ours, where are you going to choose to rebuild that wetland? Wetlands really need that specific area to protect the flooding and mitigation capacities within that watershed. If you're moving it outside of the watershed or to a different area, you lose again that ability to protect and maintain our flooding and mitigation capabilities within that watershed. I'm going to pause there and I'm going to turn it over to Joe, who's going to take you through the specific changes to the Section 28 regulation.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So one of the first changes they're looking at doing is consolidating all of the individual regulations for the 36 conservation authorities into one regulation. That's not new. That's something that came out of the prior CA Act review. They just haven't enacted it yet. So that's one process there. And through that, we really need to make sure that regulation provides enough flexibility to address local issues. There are things like flood standards are different in each regulation and things like that based on the risks to each watershed. So it does need to provide that flexibility. Well, another change they're doing with the regulation is they're updating the definition of a water course. So currently the definition refers to an identifiable depression that regularly has water flow or permanent water flow in it. They're changing that definition so that it would be a defined channel having a bed and banks and pipe that has regular or continuous flowing water within it. So what that means is reducing the regulatory jurisdiction that we have in the headwater streams or areas that are like grass swales of agricultural fields that are leading into water courses that have channels. They'd be removing that feature from our regulatory authority, whereby certain alterations in those lands without due consideration could still have impacts on downstream flooding. So it is a concern with the loss of those features or that change in definition to watercourse. They are maintaining our regulatory jurisdiction that affects river and stream valleys, the Great Lakes shorelines, as well as the flood standards. So they are staying status quo in those areas in terms of the area of jurisdiction that we have and the flood events that we rely upon for that standard. As well, they're going to maintain the existing definition of wetland in the Conservation Authorities Act. However, they're changing the other areas in which prohibitions on development apply to wetlands. So currently, provincially significant wetlands or wetlands greater than 2 hectares, our regulatory jurisdiction applies to 120 meters offset of that feature. And that distance is consistent with the adjacent land definition under the PPS. With this, they're going to reduce that authority down to 30 meters for all wetlands. So again, we're losing some of that regulatory control on development in adjacent lands around wetlands, reducing it from 120 to 30 meters. They're also proposing to streamline approvals for low-risk activities, which may include exempting some activities from requiring a permit if certain requirements or conditions are met. In the white paper for the regulation changes, they do list a lot of the activities that they're considering to be exempt from the regulation. Things like non-habitable accessory structures under 10 square meters, so like that 108 square meter, unenclosed detached decks, fencing, offline ponds, certain activities like that. That's something that's already generally current practice within our watershed. We've adopted a streamlined process for those low risk developments that we call a site clearance, which usually is done through a desktop review, and we can issue a site clearance email as opposed to making them go through an application and permit. Although it's generally standard practice, the concern here is that by removing that as a requirement for a permit, we lose the opportunity to review and comment on where those structures are going. They don't even have to speak to us in that situation. So there's some concerns there, but generally we've already streamlined that process in our current practices. They're going to limit site-specific conditions that may be attached to a permit to, again, focus only on natural hazards. So again, that's something where it's current practice here at Kettle Creek. We only impose conditions that relate to hazards. We don't get into natural heritage aspects. We very rarely impose conditions. We always try through the complete application process to have everything addressed within the application. Some situations do, we have conditions, but again, we've only focused on hazard-related conditions there. Under the regulation, we have what we call the 5 tests. So if someone applies for a permit, they have to meet 5 tests that make sure that it doesn't have an impact on the control of flooding, erosion, dynamic beach, pollution, or conservation of land. This proposal is removing pollution and conservation of lands. With pollution, the Conservation Authorities Act has a definition, which is basically deleterious materials that are generated or by development, which mostly sediment. So that pollution test gives us the ability to require and enforce sediment control. So during construction, we're mitigating any release of sediment caused by development into the waterways. By losing pollution, we'd be losing that authority to do so, and it would rest solely with the municipality. Conservation of land is one that's never had a definition under the legislation or any regulation. There are some precedenting definitions through Mining and Lands Tribunal decisions, and that relates more to the physical environment and how some of the ecological features interact with each other. So that would be removed from the regulation, again, on the intent of trying to focus us strictly to regulations. The one thing with conservation of land is it did give us the ability for any significant impacts that we felt would have an indirect impact on flooding and erosion. We would lose that ability now to have that. They would be replacing those 2 definitions with unstable soils and bedrock. Again, those are definitions that already exist in hazardous lands, and we've already been applying under the erosion test. So in this case, it's really removing the conservation of land and pollution concerns there. And then finally, they're reducing the timeline for appeals for CAs to issue a permit to the OLT. So they're reducing it from 120 days to 90 days, which isn't a concern to us. It's just speeding up the timelines for which someone can file an appeal to any decision that the Conservation Authority's made under its permits.
So the next slate of changes, I've categorized into things that may have unintended consequences or possibly increased municipal expenses and or CA expenses. The first thing is that it would be a piece of enabling the minister to freeze CA fees at current levels. It's not clear if the intention is to limit the fees to planning and development fees, or this would be the intention or the ability to limit all fees. So that would need to be clarified. And there is no indication of how long the freeze would be in place. It's simply the minister would have the ability to do that. Our fees, certainly for our fees for our planning and review, are based on a cost recovery basis. Other fees at the CA or conservation area fees and things like that wouldn't be sustainable to freeze them right now, because again, we need cost recovery plus revenue generating for some of those programs. And freezing fees for CAAs, the planning departments are already understaffed. Freezing fees may also result in downloading costs to member municipalities, because we still have to cover our costs. The CAs are able to identify, the CAs would be required to identify CA land holdings that are suitable for housing. So if you recall, in the first round of CA Act changes, we have to develop what's called a land inventory. That land inventory was originally just needs to be done by December 31st, 2024, and was to describe basically all of our land holdings, when they were acquired, how they were acquired, and what we are currently, our programs and services that we're currently undertaking them. They're opening that up and adding another element that they want us to go into those land inventories and identify any land that would be suitable for development. So this is concerning. We need to have careful consideration on how that would roll out. A lot of our CA lands, yes, were acquired with some provincial funding back in the day. But most of the land, especially locally, that we have acquired has been acquired either for its natural heritage, its recreational purposes, and or it's already identified as a floodplain. The fourth category really would be land that has been donated to the authority to be held in perpetuity with respecting the donor's intentions. And so we don't want to leave the impression out there in the public that those types of land donations would be in jeopardy for being identified in the future, now or in the future for land development. The public needs to know and be reassured that privately donated lands would not be disposed of or up for development. There's some other changes that I want to highlight as well. That we require the CA to request any information or studies needed prior to confirmation of a complete application. Again, Joe mentioned, I think back with the section 28 one, that's really current practice here at Kettle. We have a very thorough pre-consultation requirements and work very closely with our member municipalities on that. There's an existing permit application package that wholesomely explains that process and outlines what is needed for the various permits. They're proposing to provide increased flexibility for CAs to issue a permit up to its maximum length of validity and issue extensions. And this would allow an ability to increase permit terms to 5 years for all permits. They're also requiring CAs to develop, consult on, and make publicly available periodical review of our internal policies, establish, monitor, and service delivery standards. Again, Kettle Creek is already doing that. Provide maps depicting the areas for permitting requirement, apply and consult on any significant changes. Again, as we mentioned earlier, we're just finalizing our online mapping and hoping to have it available by the end of the year, and outline the pre-consultation on the permit. I would mention here that locally we feel that we're already meeting some of these objectives, but going back to the comment from the posting, that the province expects these changes to have a minimum financial impact to CAs and member municipalities. Or just be administrative in nature. We've already just spent a fair bit of money trying to get our mapping online. Some of these changes would cause changes to that mapping and requiring us to go back in and update that mapping and re-go back in and update it to the public. So there are costs related there as we go further and evaluate what these changes are deeper. There's more substantial costs there that we would have to consider to roll out these changes. Not just to mention the amount of staff time that's already gone into, feeling like we had a full and wholesome understanding of the CA Act changes that were already in place to begin to go out and speak to our member municipalities about the agreements that we would need in place. These changes are going to require more time for staff to consider that and then go back out to our municipalities to consider. So that January 2024 timeline was already tight with the municipal transitions, and now these new changes, that's getting tighter and tighter and harder to find to meet. They're also asking to changes which streamline processes to dispose of CA-owned land. So this is coupled in with the request for us to outline in our CA land inventories what land may be available for development. This was again seen as a way to free up lands faster that may be available for development. By traditionally we would have had to ask for a minister's exception to dispose of any land that had been acquired with municipal funds. This is really seen as getting away with asking formally for a minister exception. We just have to give the minister written notice that we intend to dispose of a piece of property and post it for public consultation. A number of other general housekeeping amendments included as well. So I'm just going to go through again just a quick recap of those changes, and we've tried to group them into some concerns, some overarching concerns or opportunities, and then I'll take you through that and then we'll pause and open it up for questions because I know it's a lot of information to begin. So in terms of messaging or kind of grouping these, I think one concern is some of the exceptions and the changes may transfer or erode CA's regulatory responsibilities, either erode them or transfer them to our member municipalities. So one of the key proposals under this category would be enabling exceptions from CA's permits. Enable exemptions where CA permits may not be required in some municipalities if certain conditions are met. Again, that's enabling. We don't know what the regulation would look like. The intention is unclear. It may be directed to low risk development. We don't know, or it could be a sweeping change directed to natural hazard responsibilities, directing those to a number of municipalities. It certainly looks like it's a loss of a watershed perspective and expertise and may increase risk and liability to municipalities and homeowners. The unintended consequences of some of these changes, including increased expenses to municipalities and CAs. Again, prohibiting CAs from entering into MOUs with member municipalities for plan input and review related to those prescribed acts. So, again, I'll go back to the example of natural heritage review. Many municipalities rely on those expertise or already have entered or enjoying those types of relationships with their CAs. This could be a sweeping change, and in a time when the province wants to build homes faster. This in some areas of the province represents a significant change to business as usual, and would mean, transferring responsibilities back to municipalities, a change in staffing, could be a huge undertaking to do some of those changes right now. Certainly a loss of economy of scale for certain rural and small municipalities that have, again, counting on their CAs to deliver those, and a loss of watershed perspective. The proposed fee freezes to the CA, again, assuming that this only pertains to plan input review and permitting fees. It's still concerning. The timeframe is unclear. The current fees are based on cost recovery, and a lot of CAs have done studies to prove that. There's a strong feeling, I think, that growth should pay for growth. And many planning departments, either at CAs or member municipalities, are already understaffed. Freezing fees in this way could increase costs to member municipalities and imply long-term consequences. Environmental concerns, again, identification of those CA-owned lands for development is a concern. Many of those lands were acquired because of their hazards, floodplain, natural heritage, recreation. We want to be careful that careful policies needed to protect those locally significant conservation lands and to continue to attract an donation without fear of development in the future. And again, highlighting that proposal to the changes to the Ontario Wetland Evaluation System. It could mean a significant loss to our natural wetlands that we can't afford to lose, especially within our watershed. We need to protect the complex definition of our wetlands rather than looking at them as individual cells. And I'm saying that not just from an environmental standpoint, but from a climate change mitigation and flood mitigation perspective as well. The way forward, I believe, is that if we want to ensure and work with the province, continue to work with the province on these changes, we want to play our role in solving the housing crisis, but we want to ensure that it doesn't have unintended consequences and are implemented in a fair and balanced way. I believe that the CA working group is the way that we can accomplish that. They've done good work over the last 2 years, and we would strongly encourage the province to keep that working group in place to ensure that not just CAs, but all stakeholders involved in this have a seat at the table and are engaged in how these changes can be implemented fairly without possibly having unintended consequences. So I'll pause there because I'm sure there's questions.
Okay, well, definitely concerning for conservation authorities and for municipalities. And it's important that we really understand the effect on everybody. So I'm going to open it up for any comments or questions, and maybe I'll ask Elizabeth to put the whole screen on so I can see everybody. There we go. Now I can see everybody. So if you either speak up or use your hand if you want to comment. Pretty quiet out there. Oh, Jim, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. Well, it's a very interesting presentation, and I printed it this morning and it went through before I even got there. And I think this is really a bad situation. It sounds like to me somebody's sitting in Toronto making decisions and have no ideas what about wetlands or how things should be preserved in nature. So I support everything that you say there. I think you need to have a say. I don't think they can just regulate. You're going to lose 50 acres to buildings without any input from conservation areas. So I support what you're saying, Elizabeth and Joe, and you make very good presentations. I see there was one already sent in from Halton to the government being concerned about what is happening. So I would support if you're something that would come up to identify that our Kettle Creek is in favor of against a lot of these regulations. So anyway, just my comment. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. A good presentation.
Okay, thank you, Jim. And Steve, you had your hand up.
Yeah, it's kind of like letting the fox into the hen house, I'm afraid. And you know, I remember what they did when they decided they were going to adjust our budget. And it was like April 30th, and they cut our budget in half with absolutely no consideration for the conservation areas. And it looks like it's the same thing. And this sounds like sour grapes. It's not. It's just that we have someone driving the bus who doesn't understand what the rules of the road are, to use metaphors. It's just, what Jim said, like it just opens us up to so much. And you can see the writing on the wall. This is this step, then, okay, well, let's cut the back further. We give everyone we use the same regulations to define everyone. Then that way, then everyone can be like Toronto. And those small CAs just get absorbed. And I don't want to be a doom and gloom person, but as a person on my way out of Kettle Creek, I really worry that Kettle Creek is going to have to fight just to keep its head above water. And all those wonderful things that we're doing are just going to be ignored because it doesn't fit their mold. So I think the CA working group is really important, but I worry about how much influence they will actually have. And I think back to, once again, when the budget stuff happened, right? And we went down to Toronto and we talked to the minister, and it was, like talking to a brick wall, unfortunately. I don't think he had a whole lot of say in it either. So anyways, before I get angry, I'll just sort of be quiet.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Any other comments?
Steve,
Yes, go ahead, Steve.
thanks very much, Madam Chair. A few things come first and foremost, I think, and I know the discussions are already happening, but I think we need to make sure we're working very closely with the municipalities. I can tell you, Jim and I, we had a meeting last night, and we had a council meeting on Monday night. And I know that our planning department is bringing the report back to City Council. And I think we need to make sure that all the pieces of this jigsaw puzzle, because it's conservation authorities, it's municipalities, it's the Heritage Act, all kinds of different pieces of legislation that are being affected. So I know it's happening, but I just need to reinforce the importance of sharing information with our planning staff in the city as we reply back. A couple other things that, the sale of lands, I think it would be fun just for the sake of it, once this is approved, let's go put the for sale sign up on the Dalewood Conservation Campground and see what the reaction of the public is going to be, because Dalewood combined with the farm across the road would make a great residential area. And I think that's got to, I say that topic, but I think part of what we need to do, and I think as with municipalities, is we need to get the word out to the public what this all means as well, and we need that coordinated effort. I'm interested as well, though. I think of all the work that the conservation authorities have done with agriculture and dealing with grass waterways and these headwater areas, and how does suddenly saying that we're not going to worry about headwaters, what are the farmers saying about this? Are the farmers loving this because they can add 3 more acres of land to go grow corn on? I doubt it. How is this going to impact if we're not going to be regulating headwaters? How is this going to impact on the Nutrient Management Act? And what potentially is getting into our water courses? So I don't know. I haven't seen what the OFA or CFFO have had to say about this, but they should also be concerned too, because you just look what happened in Hamilton a week ago with a stroke of the pen. The minister just added 5,000 acres to the city of Hamilton for urban development. We'll set that one aside. In all of this, is there any penalties that if we refuse to offer up lands for sale, as an example, or identify lands, is there penalties or ramifications to the conservation authority? I'm just, so anyway, I just reiterate my initial comment about the importance of being hand in hand with our member municipalities and making sure that we've got that unified response. But thanks to Joe and Elizabeth for the information that was provided in the advance package and in this today. Those are my comments for now. Thank you.
Great, and those are great comments, Steve. I really do agree with everything you're saying. It did come to my mind too about the OFA and the effect that it would have on farmlands by eliminating those grassy areas and all the different things that you mentioned. And I was envisioning Lake Whitaker being surrounded by condominiums in my mind. So I know exactly what you're talking about. And it's so against what the municipalities have been trying to do. We've been trying to keep growth and intensification, by the suggestion of the OFA in the areas that are already developed. And by looking at Bill 23 holistically, like with the municipalities, there's so many different things that are going to affect people that they're not aware of. That again, the growth paid for growth, it's always been that way. When you have to just go ahead and start building things because the province says you have to build without any thought about infrastructure that's there or will be there in the future, that's getting pretty scary for people that are going to be paying the bill, and that's going to be the municipality.
My screen has suddenly gone frozen. Can't hear anybody. If you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you. Anyway, as I said, Steve, I agree with you, and I think it's making people aware. That's really important. Any other comments? No, okay, so we can proceed, Elizabeth.
So as I mentioned at the top of the presentation, it's a lot of regulation and legislation to work through. They're all intertwined. We are meeting with Conservation Ontario, various CAs, and Steve, to your point, we do have meetings planned with our local planning departments as well to collaborate on and really kind of get down to the nitty-gritty of how we envision these impacts to us locally. So staff are working towards draft comments, but we presented some of those broader ideas to you today, but don't have things finalized. So my recommendation this morning as we work through these to tight timelines is that the power to actually get into the chair to coordinate and finalize with staff in Conservation Ontario correspondence and relevant ERO comments detailing KCCA's concerns with the More Homes Built Faster Act as discussed at the November 9th full authority meeting, and specifically calling upon the province to continue the Conservation Authority's working group. That such correspondence be forwarded to MVP Rob Black from member municipalities asking for their support to continue the CA working group to ensure that changes to support Ontario's Housing Supply Action Plan and More Homes Built Faster Act affecting CAs are implemented in a balanced manner that will not impact the CA current regulatory rules for ability to support member municipalities in plan input and review. As
It's Jim, I'm back in
members.
again. I had to sign out to come back in, so I'm back again.
Great.
Thank you, sorry.
So just finishing off that, the latter.
If
part
I
of
just
that
see the
motion.
recommendations up on there, sorry, my screen went black and I had to go out and come back in. So I'm back, thank you.
Thanks. So just finishing off the last part of that motion, that implemented in a balanced manner that will not impact the city's current regulatory rules for ability to support member municipalities and plan input and review as requested by member municipalities and outlined in avenues for reviews.
Okay, thank you. So we have the recommendations in front of us.
Question,
Yeah,
it's Steve.
Yeah.
In the second bullet point that the correspondence be forwarded to MPP Flack, what about strengthening that and something to the effect of requesting an immediate meeting with Mr. Flack as well too, that not just sending him a letter, but that, you know what, this working group wants to meet with him face to face to express their concerns and see what his facial reaction is in the face-to-face meeting to some of this stuff.
yeah, and maybe not even just even the working group, but meeting with us. So we can discuss all those things, so he understands completely what this means.
Yeah, or as part of the ongoing discussions that Elizabeth and Joe are going to be having with municipalities, that perhaps even a joint meeting that brings municipalities and the CAs, because I know that the CAT meets tomorrow. Lori Baldwin Sands, the chair, was telling us that last night. So I'm sure the CAT is going to be coming up with some sort of response. And from the city's perspective, as we both know, the CAT is important because, you know, that both our municipality is drains into both watersheds. So again, I'm trying to think more of a unified effort, but that face-to-face with Plaque to me is important.
I think that's a good point, Steve.
Comment?
So,
It's Jim Herbert. Can I give a comment?
yeah, go ahead,
Well,
Jim.
thank you. Also, too, during that presentation, you said if there are changes, some of the costs may have to be downloaded to municipalities. I think that's a point to bring out too, that budgets are set, and I don't know the extent you're talking dollar-wise, but I think that needs to be clearly outlined too. These could be some of the follow-up problems to municipalities to take these increased costs. But anyway, I just remembered that as we were talking. So anyway, thank you.
Yeah, the old download by stealth is in effect. Okay, any other comments on these recommendations? I think Elizabeth has noted your comments, Steve, about face-to-face meetings and coordinating with municipalities and other conservation authorities. Okay, so could I have a mover for these recommendations?
Peters,
Thank you. Second?
Ralph Winfield,
Thank you, Ralph. And Elizabeth, when you're ready.
Krebitz,
Yes.
Jiguer,
Yes.
Harvey,
Yes,
Herbert,
Yes,
Peters,
yes.
Warwick,
Yes.
Pelosa,
Yes.
Winfield,
yes.
and that motion passes.
Okay, excellent. So does that conclude our new business, or did you want, okay, all right. So we have no closed session and upcoming meeting, the date.
We'll have a training session, I think it was December 18th, we'll provide further information on that, once we have our member, appointments. And then the next meeting of the full authority would be, the first meeting in January, so January 18th, I believe it is.
Okay, thank you.
But as this progresses, I'll certainly keep board members informed about any draft comments or any new information coming in, just to keep those lines of communication going. And for those who are still members of councils, or if you want me to share any information with municipal staff, if they have questions, certainly be in contact with them as well.
Okay, great. All right, so I guess that concludes our business for this morning. So can I have a motion to adjourn, please?
Harvey,
Thank you.
Krebitz.
Kravitz, second, and I don't think we need to call that one. Well, thank you for everyone for attending this morning. All the best, and let's keep working on this.